When we left off last time, I was telling you that the crude benzoin was probably wet. So we have the mass of the empty watch glass. We put the crude benzoin on, and it was only a few minutes after it was filtered, so it probably had some ethanol and water on it, and it weighed that much. So we got a possibly wet weight of 4.62 grams of the crude benzoin. So days later, after it had been able to dry just in the air, I reweighed it, same sample, same watch glass, and the dry weight was much less, 3.47 grams of the dry crude benzoin. It's not that big of a deal because we're going to crystallize it anyways, but it's just nice to see what's going on there. So we have the benzoin. The wet crude benzoin was 4.62 grams. The dry was 3.47 grams. So let's, so it went down a whole over a gram, huh? Let's enter this value into the reaction table for your crude benzoin. So pause the video, put this in your reaction table, not this one. Sometimes my students get confused about crystallizations. They forget the theory behind it. So let's just clear it up real quick with this animation. So imagine you have your desired molecule, represented by a yellow circle, and your impurities, both dissolved in hot solvent, just enough hot solvent to dissolve them all. And then after you've got them, everything dissolved, you cool it down, and the desired molecule, say in our case benzoin, crystallizes, and the impurities, the thing you don't want, stays dissolved. Why would this crystallize and that not? It could have to do with the solubility of the two molecules in the particular solvent, but really it's most often because you have more of the desired molecule. So its concentration is higher, it's more likely to crystallize. Okay, so we have our crystals we want, we have the recrystallization solvent we don't want, and we have this impurities we don't want. So what should we do? Should we just let the crystallization solvent evaporate? No, that's not what you want. And that's what a lot of times students do. I think it's because they're confusing when we do extractions and we, like, say, dry the extraction solvent with sodium sulfate and then decant and let the extraction solvent evaporate. We do that when we want to get like a crude yield, but not when we're crystallizing to purify. So you don't want to do that. If you did that, if say this was, say, ethanol, the crystallization solvent, if you let all that ethanol evaporate, you're just left with an impure solid again. Your crystals just get the impurities stuck to the outside of them. So no, that's not what you want to do. What you want to do after you get everything your desired product crystallized, is you want to filter it. Because when you filter it, the crystals, the large crystals, get caught up in the filter paper. But the mother liquor, the ethanol in our case, and the impurity will get sucked through the filter paper with the impurities, so now they're separated. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, time to crystallize. I'm going to take the crude benzoin here and dissolve it in hot ethanol. So I'll have my ethanol in here, and that ethanol is going to be heated on the hot plate with the boiling stones. These are the Teflon boiling stones, polytetrafluoroethylene. I use a funnel so I don't spill. So this will be my ethanol. I heat up to boiling gently, and after I put all of my crude benzoin in here, I'll add just enough hot ethanol to get it to dissolve, let it cool and crystallize, and do another vacuum filtration. So let's watch a video on that. This does smell like roast chicken. So I'm getting my ethanol heated. It's in a 50 milliliter Erlenmeyer with boiling stones, those little white boiling stones there. If you look down the top, you might see a few little bubbles starting. Yep, coming off of the rough surface of the boiling stones. These boiling stones are the polytetrafluoroethylene, the Teflon boiling stones. PTFE. I've got my crude benzoin I scooped over from the watch glass. There's still some residual solid left on the watch glass, but I'll get that. my plan is to do this. I want to dissolve this crude benzoin in just enough hot ethanol to get it all dissolved, and then let it cool to crystallize. So, and then I want to heat it as I do it, but I don't want to heat this yet. If I put the benzoin on the hot plate now, when there's no solvent in it, then it could result in burning my crystals, because the glass gets extra hot if there's no solvent boiling in the flask. So before I put this on the hot plate, I'm going to get some of the ethanol that's boiling, coat the entire bottom of this with some solvent, and then I can put it over there and heat it as I'm adding more ethanol. And the first amount of ethanol I add, I'll actually add to my watch glass to get this last little residual, which then I'll put into here, which you'll see shortly. I'm just waiting for my ethanol to continue to heat up. Let's see where it's at now. Seeing more bubbles yet? Okay, my ethanol is just starting to boil a little bit. As I said earlier, I'll pipette some of this hot ethanol first onto the watch glass to dissolve the material that didn't come over. And now I'll get a new pipette and I'll transfer that into my flask. Now I'll repeat that again. So I repeated that a couple more times, and I feel like I got almost all of the solid off of the watch glass. And my crude product with that little bit of ethanol is here. I don't feel like I have quite enough ethanol in it to begin with it on the hot plate. I don't want to put it on the hot plate just yet. So I'm going to add some more of this boiling ethanol before I do that to protect the solid, because the solid can get very hot if there's no solvent in it and it's on a hot plate. Let me see. I think I can now feel safe enough. I might have added more than I want even, to put it on the hot plate and see if this is going to be enough solvent to dissolve everything hot. It's boiling pretty good off those boiling stones. I'm going to go ahead and turn the temperature down again a little bit until it stops. The light turns off. I don't know why. Put it at 100, I'm not sure. Okay, so let's see. Swirl this around, see what happens. Put this over here for a moment so I don't evaporate it all the way too quickly while this is warming up. Now you can see both the ethanol alone and the ethanol with the benzoin crude product is both boiling. So I'll turn the temperature down a little bit. I'll continue to add the hot ethanol to the crystallization flask to try to get it all to just dissolve, just enough hot ethanol. As I'm adding the hot ethanol, it's evaporating, so I can't go too slow, because for every squirt of ethanol I add, I'm losing some through evaporation. If I go too slow, I won't see any progress in the total volume of ethanol added. But you don't want to go too fast either, because you don't want to overshoot your endpoint. It's looking like most of it's dissolved. Not quite all of it though. see just a little more undissolved solid in there. Almost there. I'm going to call that the end point. It's close enough for me. So I'll remove my hot ethanol, turn off my hot plate. Now I have a choice. Do I want to let this evaporate on the hot or cool on the hot plate, or take it off to the counter? I think I'm going to decide to let it cool on the hot plate, and I'm going to cover it with a beaker. So I'm going to let that crystallization cool under a beaker. The beaker does have an opening here that allows some fumes to come out, but a lot less than normal. So this will slow the cooling and slow the evaporation of the ethanol, and that'll result in more pure crystals. So we'll come back in a little bit and see how these look. While my crystallization solvent's cooling and I'm hopefully forming some nice pure benzoin crystals, I'm going to prepare for the vacuum filtration. So I take my Buchner funnel and I use a pencil, not a pen, to outline it, and I'm going to cut that out, the filter paper, to fit well inside of this so I can purify my crystallized benzoin away from the crystallization solvent, the mother liquor, and the impurities. So it's been about a half an hour cooling on here. It's looking like it's got some nice looking crystals coming in. So I'm going to let it go a little longer, and I might even cool it in an ice water bath before I filter it. And I've got my vacuum filtration set up here. I got my water trap bottle again, and my filter flask with my the Buchner funnel and the filter paper cut to size, hooked up to our water aspirator. Here's how the crystals look after about an hour cooling to room temperature. You can see there's lots in there. Looks really good. I'm deciding now whether I should cool it further in an ice water bath, or just say, oh, that looks like a good enough of a yield, and filter it as is. If I cool it in an ice water bath, I'll get a higher yield, but then my crystals won't be as pure because it'll crystallize quickly some crystals in the outside of these nice ones that won't crystallize quite as selectively and as pure. I think I'm going to go with just filtering it now at room temperature and using ice cold ethanol to help wash the crystals over and wash them off. And I'll use vacuum filtration to draw that mother liquor through the filter paper quickly. Okay, I've taken my flask that I used to heat up ethanol for the crystallization. I added extra ethanol to it, and I've cooled it down in an ice water bath. I've chosen a beaker that won't let this flask fall over. Don't choose a beaker too big, because then the ice melts and it can fall over. And I've got my crystals over here ready to go at room temperature. I'll first pipette some cold ethanol onto my filter paper so that when I turn on the vacuum it sucks down well and it gets me a good seal, because I don't want those little plastic holes to be open for the filter paper to be lifted up so that the solid can get around the little plastic holes. So here we go. I'll turn on the vacuum full blast here. You can see it start to suck down. Might even push it down a little bit in the corner here. Okay, looking pretty good. So now I'm going to go over to my flask and I'll stir it up to break up the crystals a little bit, so I can pour them out quickly. There we go. I'll swirl them around and quickly dump it into the middle. Give it a tap. Nice, good yield there, huh? See the mother liquor getting drawn through the filter paper. And I'm going to set my phone down to tap this stuff out. Okay, so you can see I got most of it out. There's still a little bit left. What I'll do is I'll add some of the cold ethanol to my crystallization flask and just observe what it does. I'm going to give 2 squirts, see how it looks. Okay, when I look at this, I still see crystals undissolved. So that looks like I can pour this onto my crystals to wash them and not be too concerned about losing a lot through dissolving them. Because I am using ice cold ethanol, I'll do another couple squirts in my flask. The ethanol I'm using right now to wash these crystals, it's not only washing the crystals, it's dissolving them. So I want to be cautious with it. I don't want to add too much, so I could add more because as you can see there's still a few more crystals inside of this flask, but I'm going to not. Every time I add more ethanol, I dissolve the product as well as clean it. I'm just going to add a little bit more, rinse off some of that mother liquor, and I think I'm actually going to move these around a bit. Them on the filter paper a little more, break open the big pieces. There we go. And this whole process is not 100%. I'm going to lose some yield, but I'm going to gain a lot of purity. These crystals look really nice. They're kind of shimmery. I don't know if you can see it well in the video. And you can see the mother liquor being drawn through. There's not a lot of crystals in the mother liquor, so it's going pretty well. So I'm going to let the crystals dry under vacuum for a couple minutes, and then I'll let them air dry longer. And then I'll get my weight of my final crystallized benzoin. Oh, and by the way, it smells a lot like roasted chicken right now from the thiamine hydrochloride catalyst. Or maybe it's not the hydrochloride solvent, it smells like that, I don't know. It's the hydrochloride or it's the thiamine without the coordination. So as I did before with the crude benzoin, here's our crystallized benzoin. I carefully took the filter paper with the crystals off or out of the Buchner funnel, and then I gently scraped them onto the pre-weighed watch glass with my spatula, and they look really nice. They're a little tint of yellow, which suggests maybe a little bit of impurity, but I bet that's way less than 1% is my guess. They look really nice. Look at that. Here's the watch glass empty that I put the crystallized benzoin on. It weighs 143.24 grams, and the crystallized benzoin is here. It's on with the same watch glass. It comes in at 146.11 grams. So pause the video now and write in your reaction table the calculated mass of final crystallized benzoin. And if you compare it to the crude benzoin, I have a picture here, you can see the yellow color of the crude benzoin is pretty much all gone. So it looks like that yellow color was an impurity. Now I'll perform another little side experiment. The crystals grew in the ethanol, and we call that the mother liquor because the crystals were born in the ethanol, which is the alcohol of liquor. So I'm going to take the mother liquor and pour it into this beaker and then allow it to evaporate to see how much solid is left over. It should have the thiamine hydrochloride catalyst and some benzoin that we didn't get to crystallize. So just to see how things are going, I'll do that on the side. It's an easy little experiment to do. Not something you have to write into your reaction table, but if you want, you can jot this number down somewhere on the side of your form somewhere, or I'm going to give it to you later. Now, just for curiosity's sake, I'm going to take my mother liquor, I'm going to pour it into a beaker and allow it to evaporate away the ethanol, and then see what sort of solid remains. That solid would be our impure benzoin. see how much I was willing to lose. If I really want to, I could take that solid in pure benzene after this step and crystallize it again to get a second crop. We'll see how much is there, decide whether I want to do a second crop or not later. And I'm rinsing out my filter flask with acetone, which is fine because it'll dissolve the benzoin well, and it will evaporate same as the ethanol. So after a day or two, leaving this beaker just open to the air, the ethanol and the acetone will evaporate. I'll see what solid is left. So let's see what this means, this mother liquor evaporation. So here's our overall reaction again. So let's calculate the theoretical yields of benzoin we should get. This is actually me doing part of your reaction table. So I calculated this much benzaldehyde was added to the reaction flask, for a little over 4 grams, and then I convert the grams of benzaldehyde to moles, and then I see that there's 1 mole of benzoin produced from 2 moles of benzaldehyde. So we got that, and then I convert the moles of benzoin to the grams of benzoin. So this is our theoretical yield of benzoin that we could possibly make 100% yield. There it is again, the theoretical yield. And then when we crystallize our benzoin, we didn't collect that much. We got 2.87 grams. So instead of getting the 100% yield of a little over 4 grams, we got 2.87 grams. So we actually missed out on 1.17 grams of the possible product. So let's talk about where that might be. So here's our beaker that I poured the mother liquor from the benzoin crystal into. And it weighed this much empty, and then I filled this up, you saw in the video, with the mother liquor, and I let it sit for a few days, and it evaporated, and left behind this solid. It gave a mass of that. Here's a closer look. There's definitely some solid in there, right, when the mother liquor evaporated. When I subtract the two, I see post-crystallization residual mass of about 0.5 gram, and I potentially, well, I did lose 1.17 grams over the whole process. Some of this was lost during the filtering of the crude product and transferring flask, things like that. But of this 1.7 gram total loss I had, some of it's going to be in here, this 0.54 grams of solid after the mother liquor is evaporated. If I want, I could go and I can crystallize this again to try to get a second crop, and maybe even a third crop. Or I could say, 0.54 grams, I got a pretty good yield. I think I have enough for my purposes to carry on, so I'm just going to let it go. If I were in more of a research setting, company making a drug for sale, I might just collect this each time, save them, and then after a while I'll have a lot of it and crystallize it again. But I think this is fine for now. It's just something interesting to think about.